では、よろしくお願いします。
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Konnichiwa. My name is Derek. Thank you for the introduction. And I have an admittedly type A personality, so it should come as no surprise that I have an interest in productivity. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is related to productivity. Through working at Pivotal Labs, I've gained a lot of empathy for my colleagues through working with them. And in that process, I've realized that the teams that I work in also have a lot of opportunities for productivity gains as well. But there are obstacles that get in the way. And decision fatigue is one of those obstacles that I'd like to talk to you about. So today, let's talk about how we can minimize this kind of mental fatigue by increasing the collaboration that we have within our teams. And along the way, I'd like to introduce and show you a few examples of ways that this has manifested itself in our Swift development. As software engineers, we continuously make decisions with each keystroke that we type. Things like, should I use a class or a struct or an enum to represent this object? What should I name this protocol? Or a class, or struct, or enum, variable, constant, test. Technical difficulties. Okay. Should I build this from scratch, or should I find a library for what I need to do? Or things that are considered to be more controversial, like code formatting, whether to use CocoaPods or Carthage, tabs or spaces, I went there, whether to draw your views in storyboards or code, or as mentioned yesterday by Orda, UIKit or React Native. So we have a lot of decisions that we're thinking about, and it's these decisions, as well as the daily decisions that we encounter throughout our days, many which may seem like they're trivial, but they deplete our mental focus, our mental capability. So as a result, it becomes more difficult for us to choose between different options that we have. So eventually, we're likely to either choose the option that requires the least amount of effort, or maybe to only look at certain aspects of a decision in a very limited way, or to avoid making a choice entirely. And researchers often refer to this type of mental exhaustion as decision fatigue. So within our teams, if we're all making decisions without communicating with the rest of the team, then there's little chance other than coincidence that our own individual approach is going to match that of our team members. And oftentimes, that communication probably doesn't happen at all. Or if it does happen, it happens passively, maybe even disregarding the rest of the team as an individual decision. And the rest of the code base may begin to diverge. So this may render itself, this kind of decision fatigue, may render itself in little problems like copy-paste mistakes or bugs that may surface up from an area of the code that we didn't expect to be impacted by our change, but it did. And eventually, these add up to technical debt, and if it goes on for long enough, possibly even spaghetti code. So how can we minimize this fatigue throughout our decision-heavy workdays so we can focus that energy on more important decisions? Can we enhance our methodology, the processes that we have, to allow for more opportunities to work together with our team? And what are some concrete examples of technical solutions that can be used to streamline some of these decisions to make them simpler for our development in Swift? So in order to answer through these questions, I'd like to take a look at this within the context of a typical day at Pivotal Labs' Tokyo office. Now, it's not just engineering decisions that impact our day. It's all the decisions that we make throughout our day that deplete our mental energy, and we need to keep ourselves fueled. And how do we do that? Well, we start with breakfast, because what should I eat for breakfast? It's another decision that, at least here, we don't have to make that. And Pivotal does provide us some fuel to get us started for the day. get us started off on the right foot, and it also gives us an informal opportunity to chat with our teammates. We do have a stand-up in the mornings at 9:06 a.m., very promptly, where we discuss maybe some new members or guests who are visiting the office. We find out if anybody needs any help with anything in the office. We talk about some interesting topics or news, and also announce upcoming events either in or around the Tokyo area or held at the Pivotal office itself. After that, we'll have a quick project stand-up. And here each team meets to chat individually within their projects about how things went the previous day and then what the plan is for today. So this morning at stand-up, someone brought up a concern, mentioning that yesterday they'd had a hard time trying to determine where to put these new repository and parser and presenter objects that they had created. And they said, is this something that we can talk through together, come to a decision as a team? And not surprisingly, another engineer raised his hand and echoed the same concern, had pondered the same thing as well. So we had a short talk about project organization, or simply put, where should I put this file? And we have a lot of ways that we can find files in Xcode. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. If you know what you're looking for, you can use Open Quickly. Just type in the name of the file. You could also filter in the Project Navigator, narrow down your results. Another option is revealing the current file's location in the Project Navigator, so you can find files that you know may be in a similar location. Or if you want to take some extra time, dig through the search results and find in files. But really, why is the location of where a file is placed so important? Well, it's because if we're working in an area of the code base that we're not familiar with, then we're likely to resort to hunt and peck mode and expand a folder, search for a file, maybe expand another folder, and continue to search. And this can oftentimes take a lot longer than we think. So through our team's discussion, we could at least agree that we want to have some kind of organization within our projects and avoid a few things. The first being not having any organization at all. We all agreed we need to have some organization. And then again, generic folder names like helpers or utils, because we felt like this didn't really help to describe what was actually contained inside. Someone did propose using MVC, a very tried and true approach. And, a lot of us have experience with MVC, but other people raised concerns that, in order to put objects that don't easily fit into the MVC category, it could be hard to figure that out, like a repository object or a presenter object. And so we wanted to try and come up with something other than just MVC. So a proposal was made to instead use 3 main top-level folders, one for application, one for components, and one for UI. And then our testing folder structure is organized in the exact same way, with the exception of the resources folder, which contains some test-specific resource files that we'll read as part of a test. For the application folder, these are the files that are required for the application to run that you generally don't touch very often. Kind of get in the way. Things like your app delegate and your assets, launch screen, maybe your info plist, main Swift file, etc. This kind of cleans it up and gets them out of the way, since they're things that we're going to rarely work with. For the components folder, we'll create a single folder for each component that exists as a part of the application. So what do we consider a component? Well, we consider it to be like the model, but everything that also relates to that model object. So for example, if we have an application that presents a list of restaurants, then our restaurant folder would not only contain the model object for that restaurant object, but we'd also contain any other objects that are related to that restaurant object, such as the restaurant repository object, which would be responsible for retrieving data from the internet, maybe the parser object used to handle JSON parsing, and maybe a presenter object used for displaying this data within a view. For the UI folder, each visual screen in the application would have a folder containing the view controllers, as well as the views actually utilized for each screen. If we have delegates or data sources that are specific to a particular view controller, then we'll include those there as well. By organizing your project in a predictable way, what happens is when it comes time to add a new file to our project, we don't have to give it much thought. This is one less decision for us to make. Okay, so feeling good about this discussion and the decisions that we made, we decided to implement them. And at Pivotal Labs, we practice extreme programming, or XP. And this includes test-driven development, as well as continuous integration. But today, I'd like to just touch a bit on pair programming itself, because this is a great way for us to increase our communication within the team. And so before I joined Pivotal Labs, I really thought that I had experienced pair programming. I thought I knew what it was. But once I started to pair at Labs, I realized that their style was completely different from anything that I'd experienced before, because their setup itself is quite unique. So I'd like to share with you what our physical pair programming setup looks like. We start with one computer, and it's going to be a high-spec 27-inch iMac, so we can move as quickly as we can. We also have a second 27-inch monitor attached so that both people can view the exact same content. There are 2 keyboards attached, as well as 2 mice, so that either person can drive. And then we have a stack of index cards, maybe difficult to see in the picture, sitting on top of the monitor stand, and these are important for impromptu discussions and diagramming as we're developing. And so we have 2 primary styles that we use when we pair program. Now, the first one we call ping pong pairing, and this is where both developers get to experience both writing test code and writing implementation code, taking turns back and forth. Now, the second approach that we use is often called driver navigator. And in this case, the more experienced engineer is the navigator of the pair, who's hands-off, actually, not touching the keyboard, and focused on teaching and instructing. And this allows the driver, or the student in the pair, to be hands-on, actually writing the code and trying new things. And this is a great way that we bring new team members up to speed. And so we feel that in order to ensure a shared understanding of the code base, that it's really important for us to pair as close to 100% as possible. It's also important to note that pairing for us is not just for engineers, but we pair all of our disciplines, and that includes designers and product managers. We also change pairs daily, every single day, working with someone else, as well as changing tracks of work regularly, so working in different areas of the code. And both of these approaches helps us to ensure that we're sharing knowledge throughout the team, working towards a shared code base and not my code base. And while there are many benefits of pair programming that I would love to talk about, for our topic, the main benefit I want to highlight is the opportunity that this gives us for immediate feedback by discussing our problems and their solutions, and the ability to make decisions quickly and implement them. At 12:30, it's time for lunch. And once a week, we'll hold a tech talk during lunch on Tuesdays in our event space. We'll have lunch catered for the office, and we'll either have someone scheduled to do a presentation on an engineering, a design, or a product management topic. Or if we don't have something scheduled, then we'll watch a related video instead. And in particular, on this day, we were being inspired and dazzled by Chris and Florian from objc.io, watching a couple episodes of Swift Talk. Highly recommended. So after lunch, we get back to the code, more pair programming, continuing our session from this morning. And so, well, sometimes we have a maybe like a planning meeting or something scheduled once or maybe twice a week. We try to ensure that we can focus as much of our efforts on development as possible. Sometimes, though, we might want to have an impromptu technical discussion to tackle a more challenging problem. And today, someone mentioned that they noticed some of the differences in how Swift files were organized throughout the code base. And they thought it'd be good to have a chat with the team about how to make these more consistent. And since the project team shares the entire code base, we work throughout the entire code base, we often find ourselves working in unfamiliar areas. So having consistency really helps give some familiarity to these unseen parts of the code. So we met and discussed our Swift file organization, or what is the appropriate place for me to put this code within a file. Now, with any object that you create in Swift, depending on the complexity, the number of lines, maybe the number of constants or properties, protocols, methods, it can be kind of overwhelming. So how can we organize the content of these files to make finding the information that we need easier? So we open up a view controller and we take a look and wonder, okay, where should I put these new UI objects or methods? I like to go to the jump bar, Control-6, and pull up a great view of what's going on inside the source file. And so taking a look at this, I'm presented with a number of things, but it's kind of difficult for me to find what I'm looking for because it's not really organized. So our team agrees that we should use some Swift mark annotations. It could be used to help organize the code a little bit better into sections and maybe pull out some common parts of objects, some protocol conformance, and private methods. And this can be seen a lot more clearly if we look at a comparison between how the jump bar is rendered with these different styles. So first, without any annotations at all, it's kind of difficult to see. We can go ahead and add the mark annotations, but without separators. And while the section headers are displayed in bold, it's still kind of difficult because the text tends to run together. And third, with annotations and the section separators, you can see that this provides quite a bit more clarity and separation, makes it a lot easier to understand. So let's take a look at the same view controller with some annotations added for properties, view elements, initialization, and lifecycle methods. So you can see that there are horizontal lines which have been drawn to separate each section. Makes this a lot easier to read. So you may be thinking, all right, Derek, that's all great and all, but it's a lot of busy work to go through that in order to add all of this to our existing view controllers. And it is. So when I tend to find a monotonous, repetitive task, I like to look for ways to automate it. So existing view controllers may be tough, but for new view controllers, we can create a code snippet. And here you can see I've created a view controller boilerplate snippet in the code snippets section. We can simply create a new file here. And once we have the file, just delete the contents. Type in a quick keyboard shortcut of view controller boilerplate, and replacing the name of the file, the view controller already has everything in place for us. So this is a quick way just to get up and running with a nice template using Xcode's code snippets. Now, protocol conformance is another area that I feel is important to touch upon because this can be confusing for the reader if it's not written in a friendly way. Here we can see that the default customer object conforms to the customer protocol, but we don't actually know what components of this object belong to the customer protocol and which ones are simply a part of this object. So first, we'll just call out the properties and the initialization, and then we can pull the conformance to the customer protocol out into a separate extension along with a mark annotation, so it's clear what methods are a part of this protocol. Lastly, we'll pull out the private methods, noting that we can mark the entire extension as file private instead of having to mark each of these methods individually as file private. While these are minor changes, it really makes a difference when working with code that you're unfamiliar with to have a common organization to the contents of the file. This makes it really clear what should go where and easier to find what you're looking for. Anyone new to the project will also understand where to make changes or where to add new code. So here is one less decision for us to think about. Okay, with that wrapped up, it's time for a break. And this is but one of the many ways in which we recharge, given that pair programming requires a pretty intense focus. Just like pair programming, we play doubles ping pong. And this also acts as an informal team building opportunity for us. So why ping pong? Well, it actually really helps us to clear our minds. So when we get back to pairing, we'll have a fresh perspective and a refreshed mental energy that we can use for the problem that we were stuck on previously or for the next problem that we may encounter. Now, pairing isn't just limited within a discipline, as I'd mentioned before. Sometimes we do some cross-functional pairing in order to better align between disciplines as well. In this case, we're doing some engineering and design pairing to go over new button styles that were added to the app that we're working on. Since we have only a few styles, but many buttons where we'll be using these same styles, we want to define these in a single location. So we'll jump back over to pairing with our partner and talk through how can we implement applying these styles to UI elements consistently throughout our app. Knowing that it's easy to litter our views and view controllers with duplicated style information, we'd like to define these styles once so that they can be reused throughout the app. And our designer has provided us with a style guide, and so we decided to focus on implementing those styles and then reusing them. So we'll just start defining some of the fonts to match those styles that we need. And then some colors and a UI color extension. Or you can define a palette, as Laura suggested earlier in her presentation. Next, we'll define our actual styles. And here are a couple styles that we've defined for the sake of the example. A primary state button and a negative state button. You can consider this like as an OK and cancel. And then there's an apply to function, which takes in a button as a parameter. So for each button style case, the appropriate settings can be applied. And this could be the font size, the colors, backgrounds, foreground, border details, directly to that UI button that's passed in. And this type of approach can also be applied to any other type of UI object that you have, be it views, labels, segmented controls, etc. Lastly, all we need to do is add an extension on UI button itself so we can apply these new UI button styles that we've defined. And this is a simple method called apply, which just takes the enumerated case of the style that you want to use. And calling it looks like this. It's a nice, simple, and clean approach inside a file private method that's invoked when the view controller is loaded. So the next time we need to add a new style or apply an existing style to a UI element, we know exactly how to do it. And this is one more decision that we don't need to sweat. Satisfied with our progress for the day, we wrap up our work by holding what we call a retrospective meeting, or retro for short. And this is a meeting that we hold every Friday at the end of the weekly cycle so that we can just simply review and discuss our process. Maybe some of you already have a weekly review process, so I'm just going to cover what might make ours unique. For ingredients for a retro, we start with the whole team and the core team members, and we try to limit this to only those core team members. These are the people that have the most context of the project, and we want them to feel comfortable sharing their honest thoughts and feelings, and not to be inhibited because their manager or a stakeholder may be in the room. We provide something to eat, some food or snacks, cheese, crackers, fruit, etc. And last but not least, some beverages. And this may include some liquid courage or Nihongo de nomunication. All right, yes, everyone's awake. All right, so our retros are particularly focused on feelings, specifically how everyone felt about the last week. And we start with a whiteboard that has 3 columns. a happy column, acknowledging what's working well, a meh column, so that we can identify things that need discussion, and then a sad column to figure out what's been painful, what problems do we have, and how can we improve. Everyone will write their thoughts on the whiteboard, and then the volunteer for facilitation will review all of these items, including action items from previous weeks. We go through the content on the board one by one, and the group discusses the items, and if an action item is necessary, we make a note of it and follow up on it the following week. And the facilitator makes sure that we always end on a good note. We see our retros as a way for us to reflect for continuous improvement and as an important team building exercise. They help us to create a culture that allows anyone to feel comfortable to ask a question or raise a concern. This is really important. It also helps us to keep a pulse on recurring issues and solve problems before they become bigger. And it allows the entire team to brainstorm on solutions together, not just an individual. So Kent Beck had this to say about courage in his book on extreme programming explained. The courage to speak truths, pleasant or unpleasant, fosters communication and trust. And this is really representative of the kind of communication that we want to encourage for our teams in retros. And so we've talked about a number of different ways to increase your team's communication. And these practices are really about doing, about execution. So these are things, hopefully, that you feel you can try immediately to help better align yourself with your team. I've also given some examples of technical solutions that we work together to implement. And these help to streamline our development process and improve the consistency of our code base, minimizing some of these decisions that we make on a daily basis. So whether you're a team of 1 or a team of 100, streamlining these little decisions for yourself, your future self, and your teams will help minimize decision fatigue and allow you to reserve your mental energy for the more difficult problems to think about. And so these solutions aren't necessarily the right way or the only way to do these things. It's just one way. So if you feel like things could be simpler, stop and think about where your time is being spent and if there are ways to streamline those processes to improve your efficiency, both as an individual developer, as a pair of developers, if you're pairing, or within your team. So the next time you're faced with making a decision, and particularly those decisions that you encounter repeatedly each and every day, try to determine if there's a way to automate or simplify that decision so that you can make it easier for yourself and for the rest of your team. Because this will lower the number of trivial decisions that you need to make and the number of decisions that your teammates need to make as well, allowing everyone to save their mental energy and to focus on the more pressing decisions. Like how to build the application that we need to satisfy the needs of our user. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. Thanks to Natasha and the TriSwift conference team. This is where to find me. My name is Derek. If you have questions, please come and see me after in the Q&A room. Thank you, and have a great conference.
This is maybe a question about balance between, you certainly have an emphasis on comfort at work, but when pair programming, there's the need for kind of like for instance, I write iOS applications, but I do it in Sublime Text, lots of modifications. Do you find that you can strike a balance there, or is there a need for consistency in editor and keyboards and things?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Pair programming is very unique in that it is a socially intense experience. And things that you brought up definitely come up. Sometimes people use their own keyboards because they have a preference. I know a lot of people have preferences with IDEs and tools that they use. And I view it as really a great opportunity to learn more about something else. So, I've been able to learn, say, app code, which I didn't really know before, keyboard shortcuts that I didn't really know before. And so, kind of like Christoph talked about earlier, having empathy for your team and saying like, okay, well, I have a preference for this, but maybe the tool that this person is using has other benefits that I'm not aware of yet, and you can give that a try and learn something new. And I think learning is one of the great benefits of pair programming that is maybe understated, but it's really a great way to share knowledge. And if you have the empathy and can, maybe sacrifice some of your preferences to work together with someone, I think it's a great opportunity to learn new things. And you may be able to teach them your preferences too. So hopefully they're open to learning about that as well.
講演ありがとうございました。
ちょっとレシーバー。
はい。
じゃあ頑張ります。
大丈夫ですか。私は、リモートで働いてるんですが、それだと、ペアプログラミングがちょっと難しいと思うんですね。で、リモートで働く上で、そういう何か、こういうふうにやったらもっといいようになるよという何かアイデアがあれば教えてください。
So the question is, so he's working remotely, and he's wondering, are there ways in which he could benefit from pair programming even though he's working in a remote location? I think that's a great question. It is clearly a challenge to do pair programming, I think, in a remote fashion. In fact, the older pair programming styles were having a single laptop, say, and having one person type and then pass it back and forth, or maybe you've got a couple keyboards attached to one machine and you've just got the one monitor. And really having the appropriate equipment to do pair programming, I think, is a real important part of the experience. But that's not to say that it can't be done. I do know some people who are using Skype to do some pair programming together. And it's not an ideal situation, but it could be done. If possible, I would recommend trying to get some experience pair programming here, because I also think for the social aspects, I also worked remotely for a company for a period of time, and it got really lonely, to be honest. So pair programming really helps you to connect with your team. So if it's over Skype or FaceTime, I would recommend giving that a try. But real life is definitely the best opportunity.
Hi, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wondering what you do when you have an odd number of developers.
That's a great question. Odd man out. So when we have an odd number of developers, one person is unfortunately left on their own. And we call it soloing within the office. We use a tool called Git Duet in order to record the both names and information of a pair in our Git commits. And there's also a solo option for Git solo. So these times, it's unfortunate they don't have a pair to work with. But a couple of things that we'll do is maybe we'll switch pairs more frequently that day. So maybe one person will solo in the morning and one person will solo in the afternoon. Soloing can also be good for certain tasks, such as research tasks. Maybe you need to experiment with a few things or still do some research to figure out maybe where the right direction is. And we tend to keep a backlog in Pivotal Tracker, what we call chores. And these are technical, maybe exploration or menial tasks that need to be done. And so for times like when we have somebody who's soloing where the shared context of what's happening within a pair isn't lost for someone to work on individually, we usually have them focus on those types of tasks. So it can be a challenge, but if someone's out sick or on vacation, then that's kind of the scenario that we go with. Great question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.